And that was really good. I mean, I just, the stuff I got out there, some of the information he came up with there, it's just stuff that I hadn't really thought about. I mean, this whole thing about retailers not wanting spaces taken up.
Yeah, I mean, that part about, having to take 12 spaces for 8 chargers, or, like he said, it's a slightly variable feast, but, that made a certain amount of sense suddenly, because, yeah, like he said, if you're turning around to a pub, let's say, or a restaurant and saying, well, not so much that, but a paid car park, I think it was more his point, a paid car park, turning around to them and saying, well, we want 12 spaces, but we'll only put 8 actual parking spaces in for that, and we're gonna stick chargers on there so nobody else can park outside of the EV world. That made a lot of sense to me. And one of the things I thought about with that is, are we seeing us approaching the point where we're going to see an end to the free parking if you're charging? Because at that point, it makes financial sense. If they can say 8 spaces for 12 chargers, but for those 8 spaces, you'll get a parking fee plus your share of the charging fee.
Yeah.
Maybe it makes...
I mean, up to now, it's been seen as an incentive to people to have EV charging, so that people come in. But as EVs, it's one of these things where you get past the tipping point, and actually the economics don't start making sense anymore. If everybody's got EVs, you don't incentivize people by having charge. Well, you do, but it becomes sort of a normal thing you have to have. So then you start charging for it, and that's actually starting to happen in car parks. And we've already seen last week some of the big shopping centres have started charging for charging, which didn't Birmingham. Just started charging for charging, which wasn't Sheffield. Quite a few places, I think, I've been noticing charging's gone on. Manchester, for example. I mean, I was in Manchester a few weeks ago. Very successful trip out there, and I was able to charge for free on the local network. But now they've started to charge for charging.
Indeed. I mean, if you need to look no further than Scotland for that. I mean, everything used to be free in Scotland. The charging wise, everything was free. Now a lot of councils, there's only a couple left that aren't charging for charging, but in addition there are, and you really have to check with apps like PlugShare, and I think ZapMap covers it as well, but there's certain charges where you have to pay for charging and parking. There's somewhere you only have to pay for charging and the parking is free, and there's somewhere everything's free. So
it's you have to watch it. But I mean, the interesting, obviously, we know wholesale electricity prices now have gone through the roof, and you wonder how long some of the pricing is actually maintainable. I mean,
well, we've already seen today Genie Point have announced that their prices are going up, and that's the very reason that they've quoted as wholesale electricity prices. And it has to happen if this is sustained, and it really depends on whether this is a blip or a sustained price rise. If wholesale energy has gone up to this price on a sort of semi-permanent basis, we have to see other networks increasing. I think we just have to.
Yeah, I hate to think what Ionity will go up to. But you can actually get, and it's actually something we ought to mention. Well, we'll go back to talk about Ian, but from the Ionity point of view, they have got the subscription model they've just released for non-Ionity members, non-Ionity car owning members. So Jaguar drivers can actually sign up for a subscription for Ionity, and it may be worth it if you do a lot of traveling.
I mean, I've worked it out, and it's roughly. I haven't actually made a note of the figures because I hadn't planned on discussing this. But I did work it out, and it was something along the lines of, if you use more than 24 kilowatt hours a month, it was 24, 25, somewhere in that range per month, then Ionity is cheaper with the subscription than without. But if you're going to compare it with other networks, like of your BPs, Instavolts, Osprey, all are charging around about 40p a kilowatt hour. So if you want it to be Ionity with a subscription, you need to use somewhere in the region of 220-ish, I think it was, kilowatt hours per month for the price of Ionity to be roughly Ionity with subscription to be roughly equal to, let's say, InstaVolt with no subscription. That just to give people a rough idea. That's kind of
and a lot more expensive than Osprey as well.
indeed, yeah.
So let's talk about these Osprey chargers. These wonderful chargers behind me. I just love this idea, the Kempower stuff, and I'm really looking forward to going and seeing those.
As we said in the last episode, I mean, those are this is a phrase that is way overused nowadays, especially within the EV community. But I genuinely think these are game changers. The way they operate is so clever. I mean, Ian touched on a number of elements of it. But I think one of the things for me is just the fact that you can plug any car into any one of those without interfering with anybody else, basically, as opposed to at the moment where you have to match the car to the charger. So if you've got a 50 kilowatt capable car, you need to, or you should be looking to plug into the 50 kilowatt charger to leave the 175 kilowatt one or the 350 kilowatt one for people that can use it. Where with these, you just turn up and plug into anyone, and the remainder of the charge is available for anyone else to use. But I think, sorry,
I say it's a brilliant idea, and it just makes so much difference. And
one thing that Ian said, which I must admit I hadn't even crossed my mind when we did that last episode about the Kempower chargers with Osprey. One thing he touched upon is that you can have a 12 charger hub and have 175 kilowatt chargers effectively each one, without having to have 12 times 175 kilowatts, with about 1600 kilowatts of power. Because what you're doing is you're making certain assumptions that a certain proportion of the cars on there won't be at a low state of charge and 175 kilowatt capable. So instead of, like with tritium, say, at the moment, if you wanted 12 175 kilowatt chargers, you have to have 12 175 kilowatt chargers, and you need to have a power supply of 175 kilowatts to each individual one of those, which amounts to, about 1200, three quarters of that, about 2100 kilowatts, 2.1 megawatts. Whereas you can achieve the same thing with a load sharing system like this, probably with somewhere around 1500 kilowatts. Now, it's not a small number, but it's smaller.
And it was interesting because I was thinking nobody turns out at once, and of course then Ian puts me right on that and says the load's really gone up recently, and the demand's going up even more so. So this can't be coming at a better time. This ability to roll out these more and more of these charges.
I think he slightly misinterpreted what you were saying because I think you were specifically saying you're not going to get a whole load of cars turning up and plugging in at exactly the same moment.
Although he did seem to be saying that that's actually happening at peak times potentially. Okay, so that's why I interpreted this answer anyway. But which I could see. I mean, potentially if people get off work, they go straight to charge. It's it's the typical rush hour stuff. Everybody leaves. I mean, there's a lot to be said about remote working and hybrid work styles and whether that's going to change, but that does seem to be happening again.
Yeah,
I didn't actually think it was interesting because you talked about tritium chargers, and I thought it was interesting that they're actually rolling out some tritiums as well.
I know, yeah, I didn't actually know that Osprey were using tritiums. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah, I'm from an iPace driving point of view. That's a huge gain. Yeah. I mean, tritiums work. Tritiums are reliable. They always work. Problems. They always have decent cable lengths. All the things that circuit control doesn't have from the point of view of the iPace, they have.
And I mean, it would be nice to see how these Kempowers work with the iPace. Obviously, although we've the name of the channel, we do still at the moment have a slight iPace leaning, but it will be interesting to see how the Kempowers cope with the iPace, because if they're highly compatible, then and you're kind of inclined to think they will be, because they're a newly designed charger, so they will have tested them with the range of cars that are out.
And I'm sure from what Ian says, they would have tested, because that's something they're very keen on. And I think it's obviously reliability is one of the key things. I mean, it's always been the big selling points for the good networks, the reliability. I mean, it's interesting. Just a slight aside again. I mean, obviously I've interviewed Instavolt Adrian fairly recently, and this week on Twitter there's been quite a bit negative on Instavolt with the new BYD chargers. Just from the needs user point, which is something Instavolt get right normally. I do notice they've applied and that they are making some changes in terms of things like that. But it's interesting how you could quickly lose a reputation by having a charger which wasn't reliable and wasn't able to connect. And I think we've said this before, but the lack of usability testing, I think, on some of these chargers, particularly some of the big names out there. I mean, I don't think I found a really usable ABB charger yet.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to single out individual companies because they're all obviously trying to produce quality products. But yeah, I have to say, ABB are kind of one of the weakest links at the moment. Let's put it that way. They may not be quite as bad as the old Ecotricity chargers, for example, as in terms of reliability, etc., and compatibility. But yeah, ABB seem to be becoming a bit of a problem, and even companies like GridServe are having issues with that. And and that's no reflection on GridServe, because what they're rolling out, what they're trying to achieve is phenomenal.
Although they've had a bit of flack this week from the placement of the AC chargers, haven't they? Which I suspect, if you take into account what Ian's been saying about how the landlords work, I suspect they have no choice about where they're putting those.
Exactly. I suspect that that's entirely down to the fact that the landlords have already allocated 6 meters by 3 meters or whatever for the EV parking system. But it also goes back to even what we were saying just in the last show. A lot of things seem to link into our last show, weirdly, but where we were commenting on the fact that already you've got 2 chargers, each, when the software upgrade comes, each capable of charging 2 cars with not enough space to park 4 cars in front of them. And now we've added an AC charger into that. Yeah.
I do wonder if they should do a software link on that to lock out anything which doesn't charge at less than 22 kilowatts.
I know.
So say you've got to use the CCS or whatever, Tesla. Because I mean they're basically there for the Zoes of the world who need the fast AC charging. So.
Exactly. It would be nice to actually. That is a really good idea. In fairness, Gary, is to say almost to make them Zoe exclusive, but by limiting the minimum charging speed,
which would be good. But back to Osprey, because there are so many good things in there. I mean, the point about the spaces, the canopy point. I mean, the idea of sight lines. I'd never thought of that retailers may not want a canopy in the way of their signage. I mean, that's these things these guys have to go through and think about and do. And
it's all very well because armchair experts like us sit here and say, oh, they should all have canopies over them, and it never even crosses your mind. And then when somebody comes on and says, yeah, we've thought about it, we're trying, but. And then you hear all these explanations. And one that struck with me as well was the one about if you put a canopy and lights over your charger, that's where all the undesirables are going to hang out. Yeah. And we've already seen that in Scotland. I've seen 2 different versions of this. There was the Falkirk chargers where there was some extreme vandalism ended up happening to the chargers, which are all covered. And there's an element of that which probably ties into what Ian was saying about people congregating under those canopies. But in addition, there's a Kilmarnock hub, which has got 5 rapids and 3 ACs, 2 or 3 ACs under canopies with solar on the canopies. But those spots are popular places for people to ice because they get to park the petrol car under canopies where the rest of the car park is uncovered. So you end up with an empty car park and people parking their petrol and diesel cars in charger spots, So you made a very good point.
It is a very good point. I still love to see canopies. I think that they do make the charging experience so much better. But And I can't really think of an answer to this. I can't think of an answer to how you avoid that.
Well, for the Kilmarnock one, the only answer would be to cover the whole car park.
Yeah, maybe that's well. Going forward, maybe that's what they're going to have to do, because everybody's going to want EV charging.
Well, I think going forward, this will become less of an issue, because going forward, everybody will have EVs and be more aware of the issues, and B, there will be more chargers generally as well.
Yeah. But I just thought that was really interesting. But I think the point about the fact that there needs to be some regulation for this, and I know there's a consultancy document just come out which I advise everybody to go and have a look at and to try and fill in from the government, from the OZEV. So I have to remember it's the OZEV now, not the OLEV.
Yeah.
But the Office of Zero Energy Vehicles.
Yeah,
I can never remember exactly that, but obviously that's England and Wales and Northern Ireland, and not quite so much Scotland, but they've got a consultancy.
It does still apply to Scotland as well. For example, we still get the OZEV grant when we purchase a car.
Yeah, you do. Yeah. But the actually, that's true. Actually, I forgot that does go across. So, but anyway, those have put out this consultancy document about accessibility, charging, and also competition as well, to some extent. And I think that's really worth going into and checking out and seeing. But there does need to be some. I mean, if Ian was able to say, look, I have to go this wide because that's what the regulations say to allow for it, it's going to make a much more ammunition for him going into these places. And especially now, I get the impression from what he's saying that there's actually going to be a bit of competition now. People who actually want to have EV charging spaces and are aware that that's going to be an issue, going to be something. And I think this change, I mean, once we do get EV chargers appearing in some of these locations he's talking about, that changes the picture a lot. If you've got 6 to 7 charges to every coffee house or every shopping centre, in terms of the number of times we actually need to charge, because I mean there's that whole thing about people not needing to charge more than once every couple of weeks in most cases. You go out shopping one time, you do your weekly shopping, you charge, and you're done.
Exactly, and I think that's part of the element at the moment is, to a certain extent, people feel like if they are somewhere where there's a charger, they almost have to plug in at the moment, especially if you don't have home charging, because it's a chance to get some electricity without taking time out of your life, and you don't know when that'll be the case next. But when we get to the point where everywhere has them, then people will only plug in when they actually need to plug in. So that it certainly made a point, and also a good point that now, instead of people just saying, for example, at the moment, pretty much if you've got a pub or a restaurant, you have an Osprey charger in your car park, almost. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but it's almost that simple. Coffee shops, fast food tends to go for InstaVolt, and people like Ionity build their own specified sites. Where I think we're kind of going to the point now, from what he was saying, where multiple companies are going to compete to have access to that Starbucks car park or that KFC car park or whatever, and companies will choose what they perceive as being the best provider. Yeah,
and it's really interesting, and it's great to see that's starting to happen, and we know Osprey are doing a really good job of getting themselves out there. I mean, obviously they've also picked up the Shell contract as well recently, which is big. I'm not even sure what charges they're putting in on those for, so I should probably have asked Ian that. But
I think my understanding is the Shell contract is going to be filled with tritiums, but I could be wrong on that, but that's my understanding.
Yeah, well, certainly that's what I've seen them put in. Shell themselves have been putting in. Obviously, this is a back-end contract as well as the install contract, so they'll be managing it as well. I just want to see if my Osprey car works on Shell. That'd be good.
That would be good. Yeah. I also liked what he said about dwell time as well, because that's an under-discussed subject.
It is.
Everybody seems to think you automatically want the fastest charger that exists in every location, and that's, as Ian said, it's simply not the case. Nobody wants to go to the cinema and have to come out part way through the movie to move your car. Yeah, I mean,
it's the same thing with rapid charges at hotels. I've often thought that. I mean, I've come out of parts and things only got one of the BP pulse charges on there, and if they're working, you've got 2 hours and then you've got to unplug, or an hour and a half to unplug. And if you're staying overnight, that's a pain.
I mean, what you want to be able to do is plug your car in, go in, have your dinner, have a few drinks, relax, and not worry about your car. But if you've got to come out in a couple of hours and move your car, you can't have a couple of drinks.
Yeah. That's it. And also with a lot of hotels, if you come out in a couple of hours, you're not going to find a parking space. They get filled up pretty quickly. So yeah, I think it's a really important point, I think, and as you say, an underlooked one. I think it's and that's something which Osprey seem to really think about. I mean, their engagement they do.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know Instavolt puts similar levels of thought. In the past, they've not had the range of chargers to really, for it to really matter. I mean, up until fairly recently, all their chargers were 50 kilowatts. But I know from chatting to Instavolt that is something they also consider quite seriously.
Yeah, which is good. And I think it's interesting because Osprey are not going for the super fast chargers, but they may have some tritiums at the Shell network because that's a different location. For these kind of chargers, 150 kilowatts is going to be enough for most of these locations because you're going to spend at least half an hour in them. And if you could get something which we're going back to harking back to last week's show again, if you've got something like the EV6 which can charge at that rate, I mean, we've both seen the video of the EV6 charging system. Show, which is unbelievable when you're an iPace driver. And you would get basically 100 kilowatts consistently across the charging with that. So you'd be charging pretty quickly, and you'd have just about enough time to get a cup of coffee.
Exactly.
But if you had 350 kilowatts chargers, then you probably wouldn't have enough time to get a cup of coffee before you needed to go and unplug it. So yeah, I think this whole dwell time thing is really important, and it does. It makes the Kempowers a really interesting concept for this because you've got that ability to have that charge rates.
I mean, one thing that crossed my mind after hearing some of Ian's comments, particularly about dwell time, is wouldn't it be nice if you could actually program into your car when you're planning to come back, and the car would adjust its demand level, so then you could plug into a Kempower and say, well, I won't be back for 3 hours, for example.
There's been a lot of talk about this. There's been talk about this in Europe because there's a lot of variation on pricing based on the charge rate. In fact, even some chargers will charge you more if you plug in a 50 kilowatt car than a 100 kilowatt car. And there's been a lot of talk about, well, I need 50 kilowatt charging at the moment. Can't I just ramp my car down to do that? And some manufacturers are actually looking at this as something you'll be able to do through software, which is interesting. I think it's a really clever idea going forward.
I mean, there's pluses and minuses because ideally you don't want people taking up charges for longer than they have to in certain locations, but I can see how it could work in some instances.
But yeah, so great interview, Ian. I wish them a huge amount of luck with that. I mean, it's great, and we will see this Wolverhampton rollout fairly shortly. It's not going to be not far down the road, I don't think, before they're actually ready to go with that. Also coming up fairly shortly, I'm off to Norwich to see GridServe, see how they're getting on with their forecourt in Norwich, which is coming on well and should be available by the end of the year. So there's a lot going on at the moment with hubs and things, and it's really exciting. I think the world is changing for EV drivers. I mean, obviously, and this moves on to our next story, there's a lot more EV drivers out there now. There's
a lot more than there were, that's for sure.
So we've had the SMT figures for the last quarter, I think.
Well, it's technically the figures that are out are for September, but of course we can then add
we'll look at stuff. And this has all been tweeted out by our friend Epic Winning Maz, who's been on the show. So very exciting figures.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'll say from a general perspective is we do have to be careful of using monthly figures at any point in time. Specifically, I mean, because they can tell a narrative that doesn't necessarily exist. Because what you'll find is that March, June, September, and December, the figures will be higher than expected for EVs, and the remaining months will be lower. And the reason for that, as we certainly are aware, is Tesla. And this is no form of attack or defense. It's just a simple fact. It's that Tesla's shipments to the UK always happen in March, June, September, December, third quarter of the month. Oh, the third month of the quarter, sorry. And so you get these artificially high EV figures in those months and artificially low in the other 2 months of the quarter. And it's very easy then. It happens every year, every quarter, you know, in March, June, September, December, there's a whole load of, or the month after, actually, I suppose, there's a whole load of social media posts about, you know, Tesla are destroying the rest of the market. And then the other 2 months of the quarter, there's a whole load of posts saying, look, there's no demand for Teslas. And in actual fact, Tesla are doing absolutely brilliantly, you know, but not as well as it looks in those specific months. And it's just
and that's one of the things which is probably slightly skewed in these figures we've got for September, because Tesla, the Model 3 is the biggest, the number one selling car, full stop, I think, actually.
Exactly, yeah, the best-selling car. But for the other 2 months of the quarter, it wasn't even in the top 10.
Yeah, so if you split it across the time, but it's still a really good sales figure.
Absolutely. If you look at the quarter, it would have come round about 11th or 12th in the quarter for any car. That's not 11th or 12th for EVs. That's 11th or 12th any car. Now that is impressive at this stage in the adoption curve. That's still hugely impressive. It's
really impressive. And also, I mean, another headline figure for September is EVs outselling diesels.
Yeah. I mean, I think
which is
what I'd like to do, if we can, is just concentrate on the year-to-date figures rather than the month.
I think that's a good idea. Because I think, again, that's skewed again, isn't it? But it's certainly interesting.
Exactly. And when you look at those figures, you see that battery electric vehicles have outsold almost everything. Well, pretty much basically everything except petrol cars. They've outsold diesel, they've outsold mild hybrid diesels, mild hybrid petrols. Oh, sorry, no, they didn't outsell mild hybrid petrols, actually. Yeah. But they did outsell plug-in hybrids and hybrid electrics, non-plug-in hybrid. Yeah. So, you know, as an overall start, they're doing absolutely brilliantly. Petrol is still far and away the best seller. I mean, it's almost 50% market share. Yeah. But that is down from almost 60% a year ago.
Yeah, so. And I think you can see, I mean, we often talk about the tipping point, but you can see we've kind of reached that tipping point. People are starting, and it's particularly with what's been happening in the certainly down south in the last few weeks or so. Yeah. I mean, that's had a real impact, I think, on people's thought patterns, and certainly the conversations I've started having with people who were really EV skeptic in sort of places of work I go into, and they suddenly almost switched a switch, and it's like, well, how do we get one of these things which we have to fill up with fuel?
Exactly. I mean, it has. You almost couldn't have planned a better sales tactic for EVs, but you know, we'll take the wins where we get them. Let's be. I mean, the manufacturer figures just for the month of September. I mean, obviously, as previously discussed, Tesla is head and shoulders at sort of nearly 6,500 cars. But if you divide that out and equalize it over the quarter, you end up roughly with Volkswagen being the top company for the quarter. It's a kind of close run thing between Hyundai and Tesla for second. And my calculations, I think I've got Tesla coming narrowly in third there and Hyundai just beating them. But then you've got Audi, Kia, Mercedes, MG just behind Mercedes. You know, there's some interesting numbers in there.
Yeah, the MG sales are remarkable, and as a lot of those are EVs. I mean, that's a huge thing.
There's one we have to discuss, though. We have to mention it. Toyota. One.
Yeah.
What? I can't even think what that one is. I mean, I know they do a rebranded. Is it a Nissan van or a Honda van that's electric? So I'm guessing it's one of those.
Might well be. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, overall though, those figures are stupendous. And I think it really does show a significant movement. And I know a lot of people have put it down to the parts shortage, the chip shortage, but that affects EV sales as well.
Yeah, we see the iPace. I mean, we've obviously got the whole thing with the it's been missing for that. So.
And I actually think that a certain amount of this is down to lockdown last year. And I said this to someone earlier today. Last year, everybody was forced to stay at home, and not just in the UK, pretty much across the world, with a few exceptions. And in every one of those places, within a few short weeks, we saw a massive difference in air quality, massive. And I think a lot of people have taken that to heart. And I think that's showing in the EV sales figures as well. I think it's a combination of the petrol shortage, the fact that people saw that just taking petrol diesel vehicles off the road for a few weeks can almost, really quickly make a massive difference to the air quality. And I think it's not as simple as some people are making out by trying to just pin it down to that chip shortage.
I think there's a lot of factors. I mean, the other one which I've heard mentioned a few times recently is the lack of commute. So people are no longer, a lot of people are no longer commuting. So their actual need for longer mileage vehicles, and that perception that EVs can't do longer distances. Well, obviously we know they can. It's been pushed out aside, and people are actually starting to buy EVs, and then they find that they're actually really good cars, and they're sticking with them. And then there's word of mouth from that. So it's good.
I mean, I know several colleagues at work have bought EVs recently, and I'm not claiming all the credit, but a portion of that comes from me talking about it, just them seeing me doing it, but also some of them even watch the videos and stuff, and I've seen, oh wow, this is actually quite good. So word of mouth, big impact, and all those other factors. It's just been a bit of a perfect storm lately, I think, for EVs. There's one extra element I want to discuss about those SMMT figures, and that is EV sales as a percentage of the manufacturer's total registrations.
Oh yeah.
And we can go to Toyota, which is 0.001% of their total sales. But as you go up through the list, there's it's quite interesting to see, because I think that shows which companies are taking it seriously more and which ones aren't, and also which ones are meeting the public's expectations as well. The ones where the public are saying, oh, actually, I'll take your electric offering. So, I mean, you've got like Honda, Seat, Lexus, Volvo, they're all below 5% of sales, which is not overly surprising. But then you've got, companies like BMW are only just under 7%. Then you go up to your Skodas, Nissans, Kias. One that I think is impressive is Mini at 13.5%. That's quite impressive for a small company with a limited offering. That shows that electric Mini is getting quite good take up, especially when you compare it to the likes of the Honda EV, which is obviously not having such a big impact. Bigger volume, of course, but still something to read. Volkswagen, they're 17% of their total sales, which is impressive, but shows how much headroom there still is and how much expansion there is. One that I think singles out particularly impressively for me is Porsche, 25.73%. So basically, 1 in 4 Porsches sold is a Taycan. Or a Taycan Cross Turismo, but it's still Taycan. 1 in 4. That's huge. But who tops the list?
I can't let you remember, so you're going to tell me.
Jaguar's EV sales as a percentage of their total registrations in September in the UK, which is the home market, 50.82%.
That's an awful lot of iPaces.
That's half of Jaguar's sales in the UK this month, or last month, should I say. And that's been the case for the last 3 months as well. Jaguar has been the highest of all manufacturers for that statistic for the last 3 months. It's all very well, and we've been guilty of it, of saying they're not taking it seriously. But that's quite a significant statistic, I think.
Yeah, and I wonder if the dealers are starting to take that seriously, because I mean, certainly it's been the case up to now that they've not been taking. Certainly, if you talk about the funding for maintenance pit staff and the equipment they have, stuff like that, it's always been, oh, we'll just have one. We'll have one of these. Whereas now, if it's 50% of what they're selling, they ought to be really thinking about that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean, I just thought that was an interesting statistic, because it's easy.
It's really interesting. And I haven't actually seen. I don't think I'd actually seen those figures. I probably would have picked up on the fact that the Jaguars. Because
it was in the SMMT data release. You know, they break it down like that. MG also notable with 32.27%.
MG would have been one of the ones I definitely would have had higher on the list, because I mean, everybody.
They were third. Have a guess who's second if you haven't got the chart in front of you.
I haven't got it at all, so I've got no idea. I think who'd be second. You're not mentioned Hyundai yet? I'm not going to get it. Okay.
Didn't mention Hyundai, actually. They have got 20.5%.
Yeah, I'm actually surprised that's quite low. I actually think about it, because they've still got a lot of petrol cars in their fleet.
Yeah, you're not going to guess number two, because it's so niche and so bizarre. Or not bizarre, but in terms of the UK, it's a tiny market share. DS.
Oh, yeah.
Almost 35% of DS sold in the UK in September were electric. Anyway, there you go.
Makes sense. No, that's really interesting, actually. I think it's and it probably gives even more incentive to DAW's move to go fully EV. I mean, that's what they're selling. And they can sell those. And the iPace is a great car. I mean, even for what we said last week, the iPace is still a phenomenal car. And if it actually had been upgraded, I would probably still be going for it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
right.
But mine's been upgraded. Accidentally, mine has been upgraded, because I don't know. I really don't know what they changed when the remember last week I was talking about my car breaking down and having to be repaired, and the guy came out and did all the updates of all the elements of my car. I don't know which one he touched, but something has made an incredible improvement to my range. I mean, I got in my car this morning. I think I said I've been down here 257 miles on my dash when I got in my car this morning, and it wasn't particularly warm this morning, and that was in eco mode. So and that's probably over egging a little bit. But genuinely, I'm getting 10 to 15% more mileage than I got before the update, and my efficiency is unbelievable compared to what it was. I'm sort of, I'm seeing 20% 10 to 20% increases in efficiency on my driving, and I mean, I thought it was quite odd, actually. When I did the video about the roof box, which I'm going to put out, I say I don't seem to have lost much efficiency. I wonder if actually that was because I just had the update done before that point, because I was basically getting the same with the roof box on so I was getting before I had the roof box on.
Yeah, basically you had the update, and then the roof box was bringing you back down to where you were.
Yeah, so I'm going to probably mention that on that video. I'm re-editing it because I think it's really important. I think probably was because now I'm getting. It depends how you look at your figures, but if I mean, I know you sort of said you get between 300 and 400 miles, 100 miles, whatever it is. I was getting sub 300 last week on some of my journeys, which is I've never seen anything like that. When I'm usually over 400.
I mean, the lowest I have ever seen was I think it was I just crept under 300 once when I was driving for that purpose, and I got down to about 299 watt hours per mile, or
I just checked my figures for today at 277.
Yeah, I mean, my normal.
I've never had anything like that.
No, my normal figure. I mean, bear in mind I've got the 22-inch wheels, but my normal figure is somewhere around 330-ish, I would say.
And I'm on 20 inches, so it does have a bit of a gain over that. But
but not that much. Your figure
and my driving style hasn't changed, and I'm probably a slightly more aggressive driver anyway, so I usually get, I said normally 40 is about 400 is about my normal range well being. I expect to be about 440 405, somewhere around there.
I mean, 270 on 20 inch,
so
I think would equate to roughly to 295, something like that on 22s, and that's phenomenal.
Yeah, it's just really crazy, and I am generally getting well over the range I was getting before. And it's I mean, I marked on it when I actually did that Manchester trip. I didn't actually need to charge all the way down, and I had quite a bit of juice when I got there. And I was thinking, box on that was amazing. But interesting tomorrow, because I'm off to Birmingham tomorrow, so I will try and video this and just see what the whole journey goes by on, because I actually think I might be able to make it there and back without out charging.
That would be really impressive if you do.
Yeah, mind I probably will charge. I'll probably stop at Rugby on the way back because it's just so convenient.
Yeah.
don't think so. But, yeah, so I think that's great, and that's into EV6 figures in terms of mileage we start getting, and certainly into GV60 ranges of.
Yeah.
So this is something which was announced this week. This is the Genesis GV60, which is the Genesis is another part of the Hyundai Kia empire. It's their sort of luxury brand. Just basically coming over into the UK and doing sort of boutique sales, I think is what they described it as, but basically online sales only, and with advisors and things to help you out and do that. And they haven't actually officially launched this in the UK yet, but it has been launched as its worldwide launch, and it's based on the same platform as the EV6. But it's, I guess, one of the things I've heard from iPace drivers about the EV6 is talk about the luxury feel and although we both thought the EV6 was fine on that, but some people probably don't. Whereas the GV60 probably is, because it seems to have quite a nice. The interior definitely looks quite spicy.
The interior shots look much more luxurious than Ioniq or EV6. I mean, as I said, and I stand by it, the EV6 can hold its head up in terms of quality, but it's not Mercedes EQS, and shouldn't be Mercedes EQS quality. But the GV60, certainly interior quality looks pretty incredible. I mean, it looks extremely comfortable, luxurious, premium, call it what you like, but it looks superb, I think. There's a bit of a polarizing opinion around the gear shifter dial, or whatever you want to call it.
The crystal.
The crystal, yeah.
I mean, I can see the concept of this, that it actually shows you the car's turned on or not. So this is basically, it's like a sphere, isn't it, which spins round to reveal the gear stick and the gear control, and then spins back if you turn the car off. And then
Doctor Who or Blake 7 from about the 80s.
Yeah.
You're talking about a mind control device from one of those. It would look pretty much like.
Yeah, that's quite a good description of it. It does look like that. And I have worries about that in terms of mechanical reliability and getting coffee spilt on it, whatever. And it's, I mean, obviously that family travel may not be it's quite good for that. But I think the concept's good, but it does have a sort of it's a gimmicky, but in some ways it's it's a posh gimmick, I suppose. I can certainly see people going for it and liking it, but generally the interior,
and I like bold. Yeah,
but it is bold, and I think the interior generally has got some really nice touches over the EV6 interior. It's a different styling. I'm not sure I like the exterior styling of it. I think
I'm not as keen on it, although I do like to reserve judgment until I've seen things in the flesh. Because
because I wasn't keen on the back end of the EV6 until I saw it in the flesh. So the EV6 has got a bit of a Porsche feel to it to me. I think the look of it. I think that's maybe where they've gone from. But it's certainly interesting, and it's got some very gimmicky features, I think. I mean, the boost button and the drift mode, and I mean, some of that seems to be taken from the EV6 GT, because that I know they've got the drift mode in there. Yeah, the boost button's interesting. I mean, I can't really think why you'd have a button to press to accelerate faster. I mean, when you just use the foot pedal and do a kick down or something.
Yeah, Audi do. I mean, the Audi boost mode is just related to pedal position.
Yeah.
which makes sense, I suppose. I don't know. It's gimmicky. I think it's something for people to feel Formula One-ish. I think,
Yeah, probably. Yeah. But interesting in that it does allow them to have a good range of a car which goes good range without that. But it actually allows you to have a lot of physical acceleration as well. Probably quite good for the WLTP figures actually, because they wouldn't use the boost button, so it would.
Indeed, yeah, exactly, yeah.
And when I first saw the figures for the GV60, I thought, why is it so low compared to the EV6? But it turns out this is the Korean figures, which are very conservative. It has to be said in terms of the numbers, because the EV6 numbers are very low on the Korean version. And we know the EV6 goes a long way because someone's driven it a very long way until it ran out. The rear-wheel drive version of it, so further than the figures, the WLTP figures actually say, at reasonably high highway speed, sort of 60 mile an hour speed. So certainly you could drive it for 4 or 5 hours at 60 miles an hour.
Exactly.
And I suspect the GV60 will be very similar to that. But yeah. So it's just another alternative. It's going to be, I'm hearing it might be about 10k more than the equivalent EV6.
That I would tie in. Yeah, that's about the right range, I think.
And I'll have all the normal Genesis stuff about 5-year guarantees, and I think they do insurance and all sorts of things thrown into their packages as well. So it's just interesting. There's yet another alternative built on the GMP platform.
Exactly. And what impresses me is yet another hugely different vehicle. I mean, I think when the car world heard or car enthusiasts heard that we were moving towards these shared platform ideas, there was a real concern that we were just going to get a whole load of cloned vehicles. VW have been a little bit guilty of that, I have to say, or the VW group. But what the eGMP platform has showed us is that a shared platform doesn't mean the same vehicle. The three that have used it so far couldn't be more different from each other to a certain extent.
Yeah, and that's really good to see. I mean, I think VW, the group, yes, there's a lot of similarity between the ENIAC and the ID4, but even there they've made differences. I mean, the ENIAC, they've targeted boot space over interior space. Yep. So even there, driving wise, it's not the worst.
Yeah. I was thinking more of the Cupra, to be honest.
The Cupra. Yeah, which is very, very. So interesting. I mean, one really interesting rumor it's been doing the rounds this week is that Tesla might be interested in some of high-end Kia's technology, which is and there may be some sort of cross-licensing deal. I mean, one rumor I've heard today is that Tesla may open up the supercharger network to Hyundai in exchange for some of their technology, which would be something else. I mean, yet another selling point for Hyundai Kia. And Genesis, of course, if they did that. But,
see where that goes. I kind of don't see that progressing somehow because I think they'll want to hold on to whatever perceived advantages they have. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see.
It will be interesting. I mean, and I hear Hyundai Kia have got some pretty tight patents on some of this stuff, so it's maybe more difficult for Tesla to reinvent it, I think
with going forwards, knowing that Tesla are already talking about sharing their networks or opening up their networks, it might be a bit rash for somebody like Hyundai Kia to.
Although I'm hearing that opening up the networks may not be as wide as people think it is.
Oh yeah, it's not gonna. It's gonna. Well, certainly initially, it's going to be in specific markets where it's forced upon them in order to achieve either regulatory compliance or to get certain grants, etc.
And it may, and other things I've heard is it may not be all the superchargers even in one location. All this sort of stuff. It may only be one out of the whole bank or whatever would be opened up. So there's a lot of read the small print on that one, I think.
Exactly. Yeah, I think it's a lot of let's wait and see.
Yeah, let's see what actually happens.
But I think it would be rash for somebody like Hyundai to release patents on some of their technology just for access to that network.
Yeah, it would be. Yeah. So, but we'll see what actually happens on that, whether it actually happens at all. And obviously, there's lots of rumours still flying around on Jaguar as well. So
indeed, yeah.
So some stuff I've heard this week, which I can't talk about, but it sounds really interesting. But yeah, I think there's definitely going to be some interesting announcements next year coming from Jaguar.
Yeah,
but obviously,
absolutely. I mean, they'll be interesting. They may not be what everybody wants.
Yes. But yeah, so I think that probably fills the space. This is going to be a very long show for people to listen to anyway, but it's interesting stuff. And obviously, thanks to Ian again for joining us this week, because that's
absolutely,
it's brilliant of him to come on board, and it was a really good interview. And I'm really looking forward to going to Wolverhampton and having a look at what you've actually done with those campaigns and trying out the iPace and making sure it actually works.
Well, yeah, as well, of course, yes.
So, where can people find you? If they want to learn more about what you're talking about, you've got your YouTube channel, obviously, but you've got Twitter as well.
YouTube, you can find me on the shortcut of youtube.com/AbuDhabiDude. And my only other real presence, to be honest, is on Twitter, where I'm at AbuDhabiDude, all one word.
Yeah. And you can find me youtube.com/iPace owner and at Gary with 2 R's, WMA on Twitter. And we'll see you all on the next show.
Indeed. Thanks for watching. Good day.
Take care.